My fingers were frozen around the envelope, the kind of cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, taken over the span of what looked like 2 years. My husband and my best friend. Not just together. Together. And underneath those photographs, tucked into a smaller envelope like an afterthought, was a toxicology report with my name on it. A report I had never authorized, never even known existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 3 weeks ago, none of this existed in my world. 3 weeks ago, I was just a grandmother getting ready to host Thanksgiving. 3 weeks ago, my daughter was still dead, and the only thing that kept me going was the belief that her death had been a tragedy, not a crime. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Dorothy, though most people call me Dot. I'm 64 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Savannah, Georgia for the last 38 years. It's a beautiful old Victorian on a tree-lined street, the kind of house that tourists photograph when they walk through our neighborhood. I was a nurse for 32 years at Memorial Health, mostly in the cardiac unit. I've held the hands of people taking their last breath. I've watched families crumble in waiting rooms. I thought I understood grief, understood death, understood the worst that life could throw at a person. I was wrong. My husband Frank and I got married when I was 26. He was a real estate appraiser, steady and reliable, the kind of man who mowed the lawn every Saturday and changed the oil in both cars on schedule. We had 2 daughters. Our oldest, Catherine, lives in Atlanta with her husband and their twin boys, Marcus and Miles. They're 11 now, obsessed with basketball and video games, growing so fast it makes my chest ache. Our youngest, Vivian, died 2 years ago. She was 34. Vivian was a veterinarian, the kind of woman who'd pull over on the highway to help a stray dog. She had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. She married a man named Craig when she was 28. Craig was a financial planner, charming in that way some men are, where you can never quite tell if they're being sincere or performing sincerity. He had perfect teeth and a firm handshake, and he always brought flowers when he came to dinner. I liked him well enough. Vivian loved him desperately. They had a little girl together, my granddaughter Rosie. Rosie is 6 now, with Vivian's curly brown hair and her daddy's blue eyes. After Vivian died, Craig moved Rosie to a house across town, closer to his office. He said it was for practical reasons. I saw Rosie less and less. Craig always had an excuse. She had a play date. She wasn't feeling well. The schedule was just too hectic this week. But he made sure to stop by and visit Frank regularly. They'd have beers on the porch, watch football together. My husband and my dead daughter's husband, thick as thieves. Vivian died in what they called an accidental overdose. She'd been prescribed painkillers after a minor surgery on her wrist, a small fracture from a fall at the clinic. The medical examiner said she'd taken too many pills. Simple as that. Accidental. Tragic. Case closed. I accepted it because what choice did I have? The doctors said it, the report confirmed it, and Vivian was gone either way. Knowing the details wouldn't bring her back. But the dreams. God, the dreams. The first one came on a Sunday night, about 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I'd been making a grocery list, planning the menu, doing the kind of mundane work that fills the empty hours. I fell asleep on the couch with the TV still on, and suddenly I was in Vivian's old bedroom, the one she'd had as a teenager, with the lavender walls and the posters of horses she'd never taken down. She was sitting on her bed, maybe 16, brushing her hair. She looked at me in the mirror and said, "Mama, you need to look closer." I woke up crying. I always woke up crying when I dreamed about Vivian. Frank was already in bed. He didn't stir. I wiped my face, turned off the TV, and told myself it was just the grief, just the holidays making everything raw again. The second dream came 4 days later, on a Thursday. This time, Vivian was older, maybe 30, wearing her white veterinary coat with the embroidered name on the pocket. We were standing in my kitchen. The Thanksgiving turkey was on the counter, golden and perfect, and Vivian was staring at it with an expression I couldn't read. "Mama," she said, her voice tight, "don't drink what Frank gives you at Thanksgiving, the cider. Don't touch it." Frank always made hot apple cider for Thanksgiving. It was his one contribution to the meal, his signature thing. He'd been making it for decades, simmering it on the stove all morning with cinnamon sticks and cloves. Everyone loved it. I woke up confused and unsettled. Why would Vivian warn me about Frank's cider? It made no sense. Frank was my husband. Frank was safe. Frank was the man who held me while I sobbed at Vivian's funeral, who drove me to grief counseling every Tuesday for 6 months, who still kissed my forehead every night before turning off the light. I pushed the dream away. Grief does strange things to the mind. But the third dream, 5 days before Thanksgiving, that one I couldn't push away. Vivian was 34 in this dream, the age she was when she died. She was standing at the foot of my bed, and the room was so cold I could see my breath. She was wearing the blue dress we buried her in, and her face was serious, urgent, almost angry. "Mama, listen to me. I don't have long. Don't drink the cider Frank is making for Thanksgiving. He's been putting something in your drinks for months. Small amounts. That's why you've been feeling sick, why you're losing weight, why your hands shake. It's not old age. It's not grief. It's him. Please, Mama. He killed me. Don't let him kill you too." She grabbed my hands. Her fingers were ice cold but solid, real, pressing into my skin with desperate force. "Look in his workshop, the bottom drawer of the red toolbox. Look, Mama, please." I woke up screaming. Frank sat up beside me, groggy, asking what was wrong. "Nightmare," I said. "Just a nightmare." He rubbed my back for a moment, then rolled over and went back to sleep. I lay there in the dark, my heart hammering, and I thought about all the things I'd been dismissing. The fatigue that had been creeping in for months, bone deep and relentless. The nausea that came and went without pattern. The tremors in my hands that my doctor attributed to essential tremor, common in women my age, nothing to worry about. The weight loss, 15 pounds in 6 months, that everyone said was just stress. And Frank's cider. He didn't just make it at Thanksgiving. Over the past year, he'd started making it regularly, once a week at least. "It's good for you, Dot," he'd say, handing me a warm mug, full of antioxidants. He'd watch me drink it, every time. A small smile on his face that I'd interpreted as affection. The next morning, a Tuesday, Frank left early. He said he had an appraisal across town, a big property, might take all day. I waited until his truck disappeared around the corner. Then I walked out to his workshop. Frank's workshop was in the detached garage behind the house. It was his domain, his private space. I rarely went in there, not because he'd forbidden it, but because it was understood. Everyone needs their space in a long marriage. That was what I'd always told myself. The workshop smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Tools lined the pegboard walls. In the corner sat the red toolbox, an old craftsman chest he'd had since before we were married. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, under a layer of old rags, I found a brown glass bottle with no label. Next to it was a small digital scale, the kind you'd use to measure jewelry or, I realized with dawning horror, precise doses of something you didn't want traced. There was also a printout, folded into quarters, from a website about antifreeze poisoning. The symptoms were highlighted in yellow: fatigue, nausea, weight loss, tremors, kidney damage. Every symptom I'd been experiencing for the past 8 months. My legs gave out. I sat on the cold concrete floor of my husband's workshop and stared at that bottle and those highlighted words and felt the ground beneath my entire life crack open. 38 years. 38 years of marriage, of shared meals and holidays and grandchildren and grief, and this man was poisoning me with antifreeze like I was a stray animal he wanted to be rid of. But the bottle wasn't the worst thing I found. Beneath the printout was another folder, thicker, held together with a rubber band. Inside were bank statements, not ours, but Craig's. Joint statements showing an account in both Craig's and Frank's names. Deposits going back 2 years, regular and substantial. And paper clipped to the front was a life insurance policy on me. $750,000, taken out 14 months ago with a forged signature that looked close enough to mine to fool a casual glance. The beneficiary was Frank. There was more. Behind the toolbox, wedged between it and the wall, was a second folder. This one contained printouts of text messages between Frank and Craig, apparently screenshots Craig had printed for some reason, maybe as insurance of his own. The messages went back 3 years, well before Vivian died. I read them with shaking hands. "She's getting suspicious," Craig had written, dated 18 months before Vivian's death. V found the second phone. "Handle it," Frank replied. "We're too close now. What if she talks to Dot?" "Dot doesn't suspect anything. She trusts me completely. Just keep V quiet." The messages after Vivian's death were worse. Clinical, businesslike, two men dividing up the aftermath of a murder like they were splitting a restaurant check. Craig would get Vivian's life insurance, $380,000. Frank would get the house equity once I was gone. They'd split my policy 50-50. Craig would sell his house and move to Florida. Frank would follow in a few months once the estate was settled. They'd start fresh. Two men with blood money and no conscience, living out their golden years in the sunshine. They'd been planning this for years. My husband and my son-in-law had conspired to kill my daughter, and now they were killing me. I took photographs of everything, every document, every message, every bottle and printout and highlighted symptom. I put it all back exactly as I'd found it. Then I went inside, locked myself in the bathroom, and called Catherine. "Katie," I said, "I need you to come home. Today. Don't tell anyone, not Frank, not Craig, nobody, and don't bring the boys." Catherine drove from Atlanta in 3 hours. She must have broken every speed limit in the state. When she walked in the door and saw my face, she knew. Mothers always know when something is fundamentally wrong, and daughters of mothers know it too. I showed her everything. The photos, the text messages, the bottle, the insurance papers. I told her about the dreams. Catherine didn't cry. She went very still, the way she does when she's processing something enormous, and then she said, "We're calling the police." "Not yet." "Mom." "Katie, listen to me. We have evidence, but we need more. Those text messages are printouts. Frank could say Craig fabricated them. The bottle could be anything until it's tested. If we go to the police now, and they don't have enough for an arrest, Frank and Craig will destroy everything. They'll disappear, and they'll never pay for what they did to Vivian. So what do you suggest?" "Thanksgiving is in 5 days. Frank is making his cider. He's been slowly poisoning me for months, but I think Thanksgiving is when he plans to finish it. A large dose in the cider, a dead wife on a holiday, a grieving husband who just lost his daughter 2 years ago and now his wife. Everyone would believe it. Everyone would feel sorry for him." Catherine looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want to let him serve you poison?" "I want to catch him in the act. And I want Craig there too. I've invited him for Thanksgiving already, and he accepted. This is insane. This is justice for Vivian." That stopped her. We sat in silence for a long time, and I could see her working through it, the fear and the fury and the grief all tangled together. Finally, she said, "Okay, but we do this my way." Catherine's way turned out to be meticulous. She'd always been the planner, the organizer, the one who color-coded her school binders and kept spreadsheets of everything. She called a friend from college who was now a criminal defense attorney in Macon. Without naming names, she asked hypothetical questions about evidence, recording consent laws in Georgia, and what constituted proof of attempted murder. Georgia is a one-party consent state, meaning I could record any conversation I was part of without the other person's knowledge. Over the next 4 days, we prepared. Catherine bought a small recording device disguised as a pendant, the kind you can get online for security purposes. She also bought a home water testing kit, and we tested a half-empty bottle of Frank's cider that was still in the refrigerator. The results showed ethylene glycol levels that made Catherine's hands shake. "He's been giving you this for months," she whispered. "Mom, we need to get you to a doctor." "After Thanksgiving," I said. "I promise." We took the test results and the bottle to Catherine's attorney friend, who, after hearing the full story, agreed this was serious enough to warrant involving law enforcement before the holiday. Catherine was right, and I relented. We went to the Chatham County Sheriff's Office 2 days before Thanksgiving. I expected them to dismiss me. An old woman with dreams about her dead daughter and a theory about antifreeze, it sounded crazy even to me. But the detective assigned to us, a woman named Lieutenant Reyes, listened with an expression that got more serious by the minute. She'd worked poisoning cases before. She said the pattern I described, the slow escalation of symptoms, the hidden materials, the financial motive, it was textbook. The sheriff's department moved fast. They obtained a warrant to test the contents of the brown bottle from Frank's workshop, and it came back positive for ethylene glycol, concentrated enough to be lethal in a single large dose. They also coordinated with Vivian's original case file. The medical examiner who'd ruled her death an accidental overdose agreed to review the toxicology reports with fresh eyes, specifically looking for ethylene glycol, which hadn't been part of the original screening. But they needed more. They needed the act itself, or at minimum, a confession tied to clear evidence. Lieutenant Reyes proposed a controlled operation. I would host Thanksgiving as planned. Frank would make his cider. The house would be wired. Officers would be positioned nearby. I would never actually consume anything. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up before dawn. Frank was already downstairs. I could hear him in the kitchen, humming to himself, the sound of pots and pans, the sweet smell of apples and cinnamon drifting up the stairs. A smell that had meant warmth and tradition my entire married life. Now it smelled like death. I put on the pendant recorder. I checked the tiny camera the sheriff's team had installed in the kitchen the day before while Frank was out. Then I went downstairs and smiled at my husband. "Smells wonderful," I said. "Special batch this year," he said, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. He didn't look at me. I added something extra. "Oh, what's that?" "You'll have to taste it and find out," he winked. Catherine arrived at noon with Marcus and Miles. The boys rushed in like a hurricane of energy, immediately raiding the appetizer tray. Craig came at 1, carrying a bottle of wine and a small gift bag for Rosie, who was already there. She'd been dropped off the night before for a sleepover with Grandma and Grandpa. I'd barely slept, lying awake beside Frank, listening to him breathe, wondering how a man could sleep so peacefully while planning to murder his wife on a national holiday. The afternoon unfolded with terrible normalcy. Football on the TV, kids playing in the yard, Frank and Craig on the back porch, beers in hand, laughing about something. I watched them through the kitchen window, these two men who had killed my daughter and were now waiting for me to die, and I felt a rage so deep and so cold it was almost calm. At 4 o'clock, I called everyone to the table. The turkey was golden, the sides were steaming, the house smelled like every Thanksgiving of my life. Frank carried in his special cider in the big ceramic pot, ladling it into mugs for everyone. "Wait," I said, as he handed me my mug. "Before we eat, I want to say grace." Everyone bowed their heads. I kept my eyes open, watching Frank and Craig. Frank's hands were steady. Craig was already reaching for his cider. "Lord," I said, "we thank you for this food and for this family. We thank you for the ones who are still with us and for the ones we've lost. We especially thank you for Vivian, who watches over us even now. We ask that the truth always comes to light, no matter how long it takes, and that justice is done for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Amen." I saw Craig's hand freeze on his mug. He glanced at Frank. Frank's jaw tightened, just slightly, but he said amen along with everyone else. "Now, Frank," I said, lifting my mug, "I want you to try your cider first this year. Tell me about this special ingredient." His smile faltered. "Ladies first. Birthday girl gets first sip." "It's not my birthday. It's Thanksgiving. You know what I mean. The cook never tastes first." I insist. I held his gaze. "After 38 years, I think you can humor me." The silence at the table was suffocating. Catherine sat perfectly still, her hand resting on her phone under the table. Craig was staring at his plate. Marcus and Miles were oblivious, poking each other. Rosie was drawing on her napkin. Frank laughed, but it came out wrong. Too loud, too sharp. Fine, but I've been tasting it all morning while I cooked. Then one more sip won't hurt." I pushed his mug toward him. He picked it up. He brought it to his lips, and then he set it down without drinking. "Actually," he said, "I think it needs more sugar. Let me take it back to the kitchen." "Sit down, Frank." Something in my voice made everyone look up. Even the twins stopped fidgeting. "Sit down," I repeated, quieter now. "I know what's in the cider." Frank's face went through a transformation that still haunts me. Confusion to fear to calculation to a kind of emptiness, like watching a mask peel away to reveal nothing underneath. "Dot, what are you talking about?" "I found the bottle in your workshop. The ethylene glycol. I found the insurance policy you forged my signature on. I found the text messages between you and Craig." Craig stood up so fast his chair fell backward. I don't know what she's talking about, Frank. Sit down, Catherine said, and her voice was steel. Both of you, sit down. I read them all, I continued. Every message. Going back 3 years, before Vivian died, before you killed her. Nobody killed anyone, Frank said, but his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. This was the real Frank, the one that had been hiding behind 38 years of Saturday lawn mowing and forehead kisses. You're confused, Dot. You've been unwell. Everyone knows you haven't been yourself since Vivian passed. I've been unwell because you've been poisoning me. Ethylene glycol in the cider. Small doses for 8 months, just enough to make me sick, to make everyone think I was just an old woman falling apart from grief. And tonight was supposed to be the big dose, wasn't it? One last cup of your special cider, and poor old Dot dies on Thanksgiving. What a tragedy. What a terrible year for Frank. This is ridiculous. Frank stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this. Then maybe you'll listen to this. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from that morning. His own voice, clear and unmistakable. Special batch this year. I added something extra. That doesn't prove anything, Craig said quickly. Too quickly. He could have meant cinnamon, or vanilla, or anything. Maybe, I said. But the lab results from the bottle in his workshop prove quite a lot. So do the financial records. So do the text messages where you two discussed keeping Vivian quiet before she could tell me about whatever she discovered. Craig turned to Frank. You told me you destroyed those printouts. The room went silent. Even Craig seemed to realize what he'd just done. You told me you destroyed those printouts. I repeated his words back to him slowly, making sure every microphone in the house caught it clearly. Why would you need Frank to destroy printouts of your text messages, Craig? What was in them that needed destroying? Craig's face drained of color. Frank sat back down heavily, like a man who'd just realized the ground beneath him was gone. Vivian found out, didn't she? I said, looking directly at Craig. She found your second phone. She saw the messages between you and Frank. She knew about the insurance scheme. Maybe she even knew about the two of you planning to get rid of me eventually. And she was going to tell me. So you killed her. You made it look like an accidental overdose. It was an accident, Craig whispered. But there were tears on his face now, and they weren't tears of innocence. She wasn't supposed to die. I just needed her to sleep, to stay quiet for a few days, until Frank and I could figure things out. I gave her too much. I didn't mean to. I didn't. You didn't mean to murder your wife. Catherine's voice cracked for the first time. You just accidentally killed my sister while trying to drug her into silence so you could steal from our mother. The front door opened. Lieutenant Reyes walked in with 4 deputies. They'd heard everything, every word, broadcast in real time to the surveillance van parked 2 blocks away. Frank didn't resist. He sat in his chair like a man carved from stone while they read him his rights and put the handcuffs on. His face was blank, empty, the mask fully gone, with nothing real underneath. Craig tried to run. He actually tried to bolt through the back door, which would have been almost funny if it weren't so pathetic. A deputy caught him on the porch. He went down hard, face first into the wooden planks where he and Frank had shared beers just 3 hours earlier. Rosie was screaming. Catherine scooped her up along with the twins and took them upstairs. I could hear her murmuring to them, calm and steady even as her world collapsed, because that's what mothers do. We hold it together for the children even when we're shattered inside. I stood in my dining room, surrounded by a Thanksgiving feast no one would eat, and watched them take my husband away. The cider was still steaming in its pot, the turkey was getting cold, and somewhere, I know, Vivian was watching. The investigation took 4 months. The medical examiner re-examined Vivian's toxicology reports and found traces of ethylene glycol that had been missed in the original screening because no one had been looking for it. The painkiller overdose had been a cover, the pills in her system planted after she was already dying from the antifreeze Craig had been slipping into her evening tea. My own blood work showed chronic low-level ethylene glycol exposure. My kidneys had already sustained moderate damage, the kind that might have become fatal within another 6 to 8 months if I hadn't stopped drinking Frank's cider. My doctor said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a woman who'd been slowly murdered by the man she slept next to every night for nearly 4 decades. The trial was brutal. Frank's defense attorney tried to paint me as a paranoid, grief-stricken old woman who'd constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory. It didn't hold up. Not against the physical evidence, the recordings, Craig's own confession at the Thanksgiving table, and the surveillance footage from the kitchen camera showing Frank injecting liquid from the brown workshop bottle into the cider pot that morning. Craig took a plea deal. He testified against Frank in exchange for a reduced sentence. On the stand, he broke down completely. He described how the scheme had begun as financial fraud, Frank skimming from a property deal they'd invested in together, and escalated into insurance fraud, and then into murder when Vivian discovered what they were doing. He claimed Frank had masterminded everything, that he was just following orders, that he'd loved Vivian in his own way. The jury didn't believe him. Not about the love part, anyway. Frank was convicted of first-degree murder in Vivian's death and attempted first-degree murder in mine, along with insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, plus 30 years for the attempted murder. He's 67 years old. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. Craig was convicted of second-degree murder and conspiracy. He got 30 years. He'll be 67 himself when he's eligible for parole, if he makes it that long. From what I've heard, men who kill their wives aren't popular in prison. I sold the house. The beautiful Victorian on the tree-lined street, the one tourists used to photograph. I couldn't sleep there anymore. Couldn't walk into the kitchen without seeing Frank stirring his pot of cider. Couldn't go into the garage without smelling motor oil and betrayal. Catherine found me a small cottage near her neighborhood in Atlanta. It has a garden and a porch swing and no memories of anything. Rosie lives with Catherine now. The adoption was finalized 3 months ago. She's in therapy, working through things no 6-year-old should ever have to work through. The loss of her mother, the arrest of her father, the discovery that the adults who were supposed to protect her were monsters wearing human faces. But she's resilient. Children are, if you give them enough love and honesty. She started calling Catherine Mama K last month, and when she told me, I cried for an hour. Good tears, for once. I'm 65 now. This all happened just over a year ago, but some mornings I wake up and it feels like yesterday, and other mornings it feels like it happened to someone else entirely. My kidneys are recovering, slowly. I take medication. I see a therapist. I go to the farmer's market on Saturdays with Catherine and help the boys with their homework and read bedtime stories to Rosie and try to build a life that doesn't have Frank in it. And I dream about Vivian. Not the urgent, desperate dreams of warning, not anymore. Now she comes to me in quiet moments, sitting on the porch swing beside me, not saying much, just being there. In the last dream, she was holding a cup of tea, and she smiled at me, that wide, unguarded Vivian smile that used to light up every room she walked into, and she said, "You did good, Mama." I woke up crying, but not from sadness, from relief, from gratitude. From the unshakable belief that my daughter, 2 years gone, reached across whatever vast and impossible distance separates the living from the dead and pulled me back from the edge. Whether you believe that's possible isn't really my concern. I know what I felt. I know whose hands gripped mine in that freezing bedroom. I know whose voice cut through my denial and my trust and my comfortable blindness and said, "Mama, look closer." I looked, and what I found nearly destroyed me. But it also saved me, saved Rosie, saved Catherine from losing her mother the way she lost her sister. Every Thanksgiving now, I make hot chocolate instead of cider. Catherine brings pumpkin pie. The twins set the table. Rosie says grace, something she insisted on starting herself, and she always includes the same line, "Thank you for my mommy Vivian who watches over us." And then we eat. We laugh. We tell stories about Vivian, good stories, the real ones, not the fairy tale version of a life cut short by violence and greed. We talk about how she rescued a 3-legged dog once and named him Tripod. How she could never parallel park. How she sang off-key in the shower every single morning. How she loved us, fiercely and completely, right up until the end, and apparently beyond it. I don't know what happens after we die. I don't know if Vivian is in heaven or if she's energy, or if she's simply gone and my dreams were just a mother's instinct screaming what my conscious mind refused to see. It doesn't matter. What matters is I listened. So I'll say this to anyone who needs to hear it, and I mean every word. Trust the voice that tells you something is wrong. Trust it even when it comes from impossible places, from dreams, from the dead, from the deepest part of yourself that knows the truth before your mind is willing to accept it. Trust it even when the person you're afraid of is the person you love most. My daughter saved me. But I also saved myself. I walked into that workshop. I opened that drawer. I called my daughter. I sat at that table and looked my husband in the eye and refused to drink. Frank wanted me to go quietly. He wanted me to fade away, one poisoned cup at a time, too sick and too confused to fight back. Instead, I paid attention. I gathered evidence. I wore a wire to Thanksgiving dinner and caught a murderer. At 64 years old, I became the thing Frank never expected, a woman who fights back. And every Thanksgiving, when I raise my mug of hot chocolate and look around at what's left of my family, I make the same silent toast to Vivian. I heard you, baby girl. I listened. Mama is safe. That's all a daughter could ask for from her mother, really. That we listen when they speak, even from the other side. That we're brave enough to act on what we hear. That we never, ever stop fighting for the people we love, living or dead. So listen to your dreams. Trust your dead. And if someone who loves you whispers, "Don't drink that for God's sake," put the cup down.